In the small town of Green Meadows, there was a group of boys who were known for their adventurous spirit and mischievous deeds. They were always up to something, whether it was climbing the tallest trees, racing their bikes down the winding roads, or exploring the mysterious caves near the riverbank. The leader of the group was a boy named Jack. He had curly brown hair that always looked like he had just woken up, and a smile that could light up the darkest room. Jack was fearless, and his friends admired him for his bravery and his never-ending ideas for new adventures. One sunny afternoon, Jack gathered his friends, Alex, Brian, and Charlie, under the old oak tree in his backyard. "I have a plan," he announced with a twinkle in his eye. "We are going to build the best treehouse ever, right here in this tree." The boys cheered and immediately started planning. They talked about what materials they would need, how they would build it, and who would be in charge of what. They were all excited, and their energy was contagious. As they were discussing their plans, Mrs. Wilson, Jack's neighbor, walked by. She was an elderly lady with a kind face and a gentle smile. "What are you boys up to today?" she asked curiously. "We're going to build a tree house, Mrs. Wilson," Alex replied enthusiastically. "That sounds wonderful," she said with a smile. "Just be careful and don't hurt yourselves." "We will, Mrs. Wilson." "Thank you," they all said in unison, and she continued on her way. The boys spent the rest of the day gathering wood, nails, and tools. They worked together, each taking on different tasks. Jack was the designer, drawing out plans and making sure everything looked perfect. Alex was the builder, strong and handy with tools. Brian was the lookout, making sure no one would come and spoil their fun. And Charlie was the supplier, running back and forth to fetch anything the others needed. As the sun began to set, the foundation of the treehouse was laid. It was sturdy and well built, thanks to the boys' hard work and teamwork. They looked at what they had accomplished with pride. "We'll continue tomorrow," Jack said, "and soon, we'll have the best treehouse in all of Green Meadows." The boys agreed and went home, dreaming of the adventures they would have in their new treehouse. As the first light of dawn broke over Green Meadows, the boys were already up and ready to continue their work on the treehouse. They had big plans for the day, and nothing could dampen their spirits. Jack arrived first, with a rolled-up set of plans under his arm. He spread them out on the ground, and the boys gathered around to see what the day held in store. "Today, we build the walls and the roof," Jack declared. "By sunset, we'll have a real treehouse." The boys set to work with a will. They measured and cut the wood, hammered nails with precision, and slowly but surely, the treehouse began to take shape. They worked tirelessly, each boy taking turns to hammer, saw, and secure the wooden planks. The treehouse was coming together, piece by piece, nail by nail. Laughter and chatter filled the air, mixing with the sound of tools and the rustling leaves. Jack stood back for a moment, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Look at us," he said with a grin. "We're like real builders." Alex laughed. "Yeah, and this treehouse is our masterpiece." Brian, who had been quiet for a while, spoke up. Do you think we'll always be friends like this? Charlie put down his hammer and looked at his friends. Of course, we will. We're the 4 Musketeers, remember? All for one and one for all. The boys nodded in agreement, and a sense of camaraderie swept over them. They were more than just friends. They were a team, a unit, a brotherhood. As the day turned into evening, the treehouse was nearly finished. The walls were up, the roof was secure, and they had even managed to install a small window that looked out over the meadow. We need a flag, Jack said suddenly. Every great fort needs a flag. The boys thought for a moment, then Brian had an idea. We can make one out of Mrs. Wilson's old curtains. She said we could use them for our adventures. With a new mission in mind, they raced to Mrs. Wilson's house and asked for the curtains. She smiled and handed him over, along with a plate of cookies for their hard work. Back at the treehouse, they cut the curtains into a flag and painted their club's emblem on it, a shield with 4 stars representing each of them. They hoisted the flag up to the top of the treehouse, where it fluttered proudly in the breeze. As night fell, they sat inside their new hideout, munching on cookies and planning their next adventure. The treehouse was a symbol of their friendship, a place where they could be themselves and dream big dreams. But as the moon rose high in the sky, a shadow moved across the meadow. It was Old Man Jenkins, the town's grumpiest resident, and he did not look pleased. "What are you boys up to?" he barked, his voice echoing in the quiet night. The boys exchanged worried glances. Would Old Man Jenkins ruin their fun, or would they find a way to win him over? The boys looked at Old Man Jenkins, their hearts pounding. He was known for his sour disposition and his dislike for anything that disrupted the peace and quiet of Green Meadows. "What's all this noise about?" Jenkins grumbled, pointing a finger at the treehouse. "You boys think you can just build whatever you want?" Jack stepped forward, the unofficial spokesman of the group. "We're sorry, Mr. Jenkins. We didn't mean to disturb you. We just wanted a place to play and have adventures." Jenkins harumphed, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "Adventures, eh? In my day, adventures were had out in the world, not cooped up in some wooden box." The boys exchanged glances. This was their chance to show Jenkins that their treehouse was more than just a wooden box. It was a place of imagination and creativity. "Would you like to come up and see it?" Brian offered, surprising even himself. Jenkins looked taken aback. "Me? Up there?" "Yes," Charlie chimed in. "We can tell you stories of our adventures. And we have cookies." The old man's expression softened at the mention of cookies. "Well, I suppose I could take a look," he conceded. The boys helped Jenkins climb the ladder, and soon they were all inside the treehouse. The boys watched nervously as Jenkins inspected their handiwork. After a moment, a small smile crept onto Jenkins' face. "Not bad," he admitted. "Reminds me of the forts we used to build as kids." The boys breathed a sigh of relief. They offered Jenkins the best chair and a cookie, and Jack began to tell a story of their latest adventure by the creek. As Jenkins listened, his eyes twinkled with a light that the boys had never seen before. He laughed at the right moments and even shared a story of his own, a tale of mischief and bravery from his youth. The evening passed in a blur of stories and laughter. Jenkins turned out to be quite the storyteller, and the boys hung on his every word. They realized that beneath his gruff exterior, Jenkins had a heart full of adventure just like theirs. When it was time for Jenkins to leave, he patted the walls of the treehouse. "Keep building your adventures, boys," he said, "and maybe invite this old man again sometime." The boys promised they would, and they watched as Jenkins made his way home, a little spring in his step. The treehouse had brought them a new friend, bridged a gap between generations, and taught them that sometimes the most unlikely people can share the same spirit of adventure. And as the stars shone brightly above, the boys knew that their treehouse was more than just a place. It was a beginning of many stories yet to unfold. The next morning, the boys met under the treehouse with a new sense of purpose. Old Man Jenkins' visit had given him a fresh perspective on their adventures. They realized that their stories could bring joy not just to themselves, but to others as well. "We should write a book," Charlie suggested, his eyes bright with excitement. "A book about all our adventures." The idea was met with unanimous approval. They decided to call it The Chronicles of Green Meadows, and each boy would contribute his favorite stories. They spent the morning gathering paper, pencils, and anything else they could find to start their writing. The treehouse was filled with the scratching of pencils and the rustling of pages as the boys poured their hearts into the stories. Jack wrote about the time they had built a raft and sailed down the river, only to be chased by a swan. Alex recounted the day they had found a stray dog and returned it to its grateful owner. Brian described the secret fort they had discovered in the woods, and Charlie told the tale of the great snowball fight that had lasted an entire day. As they wrote, they laughed and reminisced, reliving each adventure as if it were happening all over again. But their writing was interrupted by a shout from below. "Boys, boys, come quick." It was Mrs. Wilson, and she sounded urgent. The boys scrambled down the ladder and found Mrs. Wilson pointing toward the town square. "There's a carnival in town," she exclaimed. "They've got games, rides, and the most delicious food you've ever tasted." The boys' eyes lit up at the prospect of a carnival. They thanked Mrs. Wilson and raced toward the town square, their book temporarily forgotten. The carnival was a riot of colors and sounds. There were tents striped in white and red, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy in the air, and the sound of laughter and music everywhere. They tried their hand at ring toss, knocked down cans with baseballs, and won prizes at the shooting gallery. They rode the Ferris wheel, which gave them a view of the entire town, and the merry-go-round, with its brightly painted horses. As the day turned to evening, the boys sat on the grass, exhausted but happy, their arms full of stuffed animals and other prizes. "This was the best day ever," Alex said, his face sticky with candy apple. "Yeah," Jack agreed. And we've got a new adventure to add to our book." The boys nodded, their thoughts already turning back to their writing. The carnival had been fun, but their real adventure was waiting for them in the treehouse. As the stars began to appear in the twilight sky, they made their way back to Green Meadows, their hearts full of stories and their minds buzzing with ideas. And so, the boys' summer continued, filled with writing, adventures, and the occasional visit from Old Man Jenkins, who turned out to be quite the fan of their stories. But as the leaves began to turn and the air grew crisp, the boys knew that their greatest adventure was still ahead of them. For in Green Meadows, adventure was never far away, and the boys were always ready to meet it head-on. The days grew shorter and the nights cooler as autumn wrapped Green Meadows in a blanket of red and gold. The boys, now with a notebook thick with stories, decided it was time to share their adventures with the world. "We should have a storytelling night," Jack suggested one evening as they sat in the treehouse, surrounded by the sounds of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Around a campfire, Alex added, his eyes lighting up at the thought. "And we can invite the whole town, even Old Man Jenkins," Brian said with a chuckle. The idea was perfect. They set the date and began preparing invitations, which they hand-delivered to every house in Green Meadows. The night of the storytelling arrived, and the boys were a bundle of nerves and excitement. They had set up a campfire in Jack's backyard, with logs arranged in a circle for seating. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm glow over the gathering crowd. People from all over town showed up, bringing blankets and snacks. Mrs. Wilson came with a batch of her famous chocolate chip cookies, and to everyone's surprise, Old Man Jenkins arrived with a smile on his face. The fire crackled as Jack stood up to welcome everyone. "Thank you for coming to our storytelling night," he began. "We've got some great tales to share with you, all about the adventures we've had right here in Green Meadows." One by one, the boys took turns telling their stories. They spoke of the haunted house at the end of the street, the mysterious footprints they found in the woods, and the legendary fish they caught in the creek. The audience laughed, gasped, and clapped, swept away by the boys' vivid storytelling. Even Old Man Jenkins was seen wiping a tear from his eye during a particularly touching story. As the night wore on, the stars twinkled above, and the fire burned down to embers. The boys concluded their storytelling with a final tale, the story of how they built their treehouse and the friendships they forged along the way. There was a moment of silence when they finished, and then the crowd erupted into applause. The boys bowed, their cheeks flushed with pride. "That was wonderful," Mrs. Wilson said, hugging each of them. "You boys have a gift." Old Man Jenkins approached, his usual gruffness softened by the night's events. "You've done something special here," he said. "You've brought this town together with your stories. Keep writing, keep adventuring, and keep being boys." The boys promised they would, and as the crowd dispersed, they sat by the dying fire, feeling a sense of accomplishment they had never felt before. Their storytelling night had been a success, and they knew it was only the beginning. For as long as there were stars in the sky and fire in their hearts, there would be stories to tell. And sir, the boys of Green Meadows continued to live and write their adventures, each day bringing a new chapter, each chapter adding to the legend of boys will be boys. As the leaves of Green Meadows turned from gold to brown, and the air filled with the crispness of impending winter, the boys found themselves at the threshold of a new adventure. The storytelling night had sparked something in the town, a sense of unity and a thirst for tales of wonder and excitement. The boys, now local celebrities, were approached by Mr. Thompson, the town librarian. "I've heard about your storytelling night," he said, his eyes gleaming behind his round spectacles. "How would you boys like to have a regular storytelling hour at the library?" The proposal was met with an enthusiastic yes, and soon, every Saturday morning, the library's reading room was packed with children and adults alike, eager to hear the boys' tales. Each week, they shared a new story, sometimes inviting members of the audience to contribute their own. The library became a hub of imagination, where stories of Green Meadows past mingled with the boys' adventures, creating a tapestry of the town's history and spirit. But as winter settled in, a challenge arose. The old oak tree that housed the beloved treehouse was showing signs of age. Branches had begun to creak and groan under the weight of snow, and the boys worried for their sanctuary. "We need to save the treehouse," Jack declared one frosty afternoon. "It's more than just wood and nails, it's our home." The boys set out to reinforce the treehouse, braving the cold to add supports and secure loose boards. They worked with determination, their breaths visible in the chilly air, their fingers numb but steady. As they worked, the town watched and whispered. The boys' efforts to save the treehouse became the talk of Green Meadows, and soon, help arrived in unexpected ways. Mrs. Wilson knitted warm scarves and mittens for the boys. Mr. Jenkins, showing a softer side, offered his tools and wisdom. And the children from the library's storytelling hour came with hot cocoa and encouragement. Together, the town worked to preserve the treehouse, and by the time the first buds of spring appeared, the treehouse stood strong, ready to face many more seasons. The boys' bond with Green Meadows had never been stronger. They had learned that adventures could be found not only in the wilds of the world but in the hearts of people and the community that surrounded them. And as the cycle of seasons continued, so did the cycle of stories. For every ending brought a new beginning, and in Green Meadows, the end was never truly the end. Spring brought with it a sense of renewal to Green Meadows, and with the treehouse standing firm, the boys felt invigorated to embark on new adventures. The town had come together to save a symbol of childhood wonder, and now the boys wanted to give back. "We should do something for Green Meadows," Jack said one morning, the fresh scent of blooming flowers drifting through the open windows of the treehouse. "Like what?" Alex asked, curious. "Let's organize a town festival," Brian suggested. "A celebration of spring, with games, food, and, of course, stories." The idea was met with excitement, and the boys set to work planning the festival. They met with Mr. Thompson to discuss using the library grounds, and he agreed wholeheartedly, offering to help in any way he could. Word of the festival spread quickly, and soon, the entire town was involved. People volunteered to set up booths, perform music, and cook food. The children from the storytelling hour at the library created colorful banners and signs. The day of the festival arrived, and the library grounds were transformed into a carnival of joy. There were flowers everywhere, the smell of freshly baked pies filled the air, and laughter echoed from every corner. The boys hosted a storytelling stage, where they shared their tales and invited others to tell their own. Old Man Jenkins surprised everyone by reciting a poem he had written about green meadows, earning him a standing ovation. As the sun began to set, the festival showed no signs of slowing down. People danced to the music of a local band, and the boys led a parade around the library, with children following, waving their handmade banners. The festival was a testament to the spirit of Green Meadows, a community that came together to celebrate life, friendship, and the stories that connected them all. As the stars appeared overhead, the boys sat on the steps of the library, watching the festivities. They had created something beautiful, something that went beyond the wood and nails of their treehouse. And as they sat there, they knew that their adventures were far from over. For in Green Meadows, every day was a chance for a new story, a new memory, a new adventure. The festival had been a resounding success, and as the days grew warmer, the boys of Green Meadows found themselves at the heart of a community that had embraced the spirit of adventure and storytelling. But as with all tales, the time had come to approach the final chapters of their current journey. The boys gathered in the treehouse, the walls now adorned with pictures and mementos of their escapades. "We've done so much," Jack said, looking around at his friends. "But I feel like there's one last adventure we need to have before we close this chapter." Alex nodded. "I agree. We've helped the town, shared our stories, and saved the treehouse. What's left?" Brian, ever the dreamer, spoke up. "There's one thing we haven't done yet. We've never gone on a nighttime treasure hunt." The idea sparked excitement among the boys. A treasure hunt, under the stars, would be the perfect way to cap off their series of adventures. They spent the next few days planning, creating maps, and devising clues that would lead them around Green Meadows. They decided the final clue would lead back to the treehouse, where they would bury a time capsule filled with their stories and memories. The night of the treasure hunt arrived, and the boys set out with flashlights and their hand-drawn map. They followed clues that took them to the creek where they had sailed their raft, the old fort in the woods, and Mrs. Wilson's garden, where they had first decided to build the treehouse. Each location held memories, and as they journeyed from one to the next, they shared stories and laughed, their bond growing ever stronger. Finally, they arrived back at the treehouse, where they had hidden the time capsule. Inside, they placed their notebook of stories, a photo of the four of them, and various trinkets that represented their adventures. They dug a hole beneath the treehouse and placed the capsule inside, covering it with earth. "One day, someone will find this and know about the boys of Green Meadows," Charlie said, patting the ground. The boys sat in the treehouse, looking out at the town that had become a part of their story. They knew that while this chapter was ending, their friendship and the tales of their adventures would live on forever. Under the gentle glow of the moon, the boys of Green Meadows gathered in their treehouse one last time. The air was filled with the sweet scent of spring, and the stars above shone like diamonds scattered across the velvet sky. Jack, Alex, Brian, and Charlie sat in a circle, their faces illuminated by the soft light of lanterns. They each held a piece of paper, their final story written in their own hand. "It's time," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Let's read our stories aloud, and then let's release them to the wind." One by one, they read their stories. Jack spoke of the day they had built the treehouse, a symbol of their friendship and a keeper of their secrets. Alex recounted the adventures they had shared, from the haunted house to the legendary fish. Brian described the bonds they had formed, not just with each other, but with the town of Green Meadows. And Charlie told of the future, of the dreams they each held and the promise to always remember the days of their youth. As they finished, they tied their stories to 4 balloons they had found earlier that day. They stepped outside, onto the balcony of the treehouse, and released the balloons into the night sky. The boys watched in silence as the balloons ascended higher and higher, carrying their stories to the ends of the earth. It was a moment of release, of letting go, but also a moment of preservation, for their tales would now live on forever. "We'll always be the boys of Green Meadows," Charlie said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Always," the others agreed. They stayed there for a long while, watching until the balloons were no longer visible, until they were just a memory against the canvas of the night. And then, as if by unspoken agreement, they descended the ladder of the treehouse for the last time. They walked through the town, past the library, the creek, and Mrs. Wilson's garden, each step a memory, each memory a treasure. At the edge of town, they paused and looked back at the treehouse, now just a silhouette against the dawn's early light. It stood as a testament to their childhood, to the adventures they had, and to the stories they shared. With a final wave, they turned and walked into the sunrise, toward the future, toward new adventures, but always carrying with them the spirit of Green Meadows and the days when they were boys. For though chapters may end, the story never truly does. It lives on in the hearts of those who lived it, in the whispers of the wind, and in the laughter of every child who dreams of treehouses and treasure hunts. And sir, the story of Boys Will Be Boys comes to a close, but the legend of Jack, Alex, Brian, and Charlie, the boys of Green Meadows, will forever echo in the rustling leaves of the old oak tree.